I took some melodic notes rereading the first canto of Lord Byron's Don Juan . I do not like Don Juan's version of passionate love since it stands alone like Adam's recollection of his fall, Byron says. I do appreciate the part where Byron describes the filching of the fire by Prometheus, which was an act unforgiven by Zeus. The way Byron describes this has a nice conceptual feel. He speaks about the humane society with a beginning to incorporate wondrous new spinning machines. And, I like that he brings that up in his poem. Yet, I do not think the coals of Sir Humphrey Davy's lantern are good because they are mined, and mining is dirty work even if he thinks it's safe. And, I have some trouble with the travels to Timbuktu because now we can go anywhere and what that means is Emerson's traveling is a fool's paradise. Byron speaks of November as a month where fine days are few, and I agree, but because that is not pleasant, I dislike it. I like it when Donna Julia is in bed sleeping, for in the story she gets into trouble when she is awake. Sleep is a reconcilement, as Ben Jonson writes. I dislike it when Don Alfonso arrives and enters anywhere because he is unpleasant. The maid Antonia is also one who contrives a plot against Don Alfonso, so that is mean. I do love that Julia speaks about holding the common privileges of her sex, female, because there is something special about being a woman. I do not like Count O'Reilly who took Algiers in a battle. And, for some reason I do not like the Italian musico Cazzani who sings in vain, maybe because of that. I don't like it when Antonia sobs. And, I don't like the idea of throwing doubt upon anyone, as the Hildego does. I wish Clarence was not depicted with a Malmsey butt. And, who really thinks much of the devil or anybody who finds a deuced balance with him. I think it fine when King David's blood grew dull in motion as a phrase, but when Byron states that David lived when he lived I am struck as to that description. I do not like it when Juan talks himself into not sleeping. I do like it that silence springs from delicacy to Don Juan's ear. But, I don't like it that Juan contrives so much. Nor, when Alfonso sues for a divorce is it a wondrous act. I like it that Donna Inez vows to the Virgin Mary. And, also that traveling to France and Italy to get news serves as a means for advancing the plot of the story is nice. I like the touch of Don Juan's scrape. Yet, I do not like it that Byron degrades the style of Homer and Virgil by comparing his to their epics. It is good that Byron believes in Milton. I do not like how Byron's Juan lays it all on God. I appreciate the mention of the Edinburgh Review and the Quarterly as treating a dissenting author very martyrdly. I like it plenty that Byron speaks of Sir Francis Bacon's brazen head. I like it that he reads the Bible. However, I do not like it that he projects what William Wordsworth understood as something silly at times. Angel Grouchy with me. Melodic notes from my rereading of Canto 2 of Lord Byron's Don Juan that Byron refers to a pretty woman as a thing seems pretty bad of him. I like it when he writes how mankind has a turn upon the world's axis. I wish Juan had never been sent to Cadiz, even though it is a pretty town. Byron writes of Peru learning to rebel, which feels not right to me. I do not like how he speaks about breaking an Arab horse, though I know that is the proper terminology. I love the idea that his muse is a chaste one, but I have heard that a muse in general will be unfaithful. I do not like how Byron makes fun of the Venetian Fazioli. I am happy that Don Juan had a successful education. It is sad that Juan had to leave his mother, his mistress and no wife, which caused him to grieve. I like it that Byron's own muse is not a weeping one. I like the Queen of Denmark's remark about sweets to the sweet. Also, it is a nice effect to think of how the waters of Guadalquivir glide. I like it when Byron writes that love is a capricious power. I like the name of the most holy ship, the Trinidada. I am glad Juan had a tutor named Pedrillo. For some mysterious reason, I do not like the maker of the water pumps, Mr. Man from London. That death is dreadful seems a good concern of Byron and Juan in the story as well. I like how Don Juan is followed like Sancho Panza from Don Quixote . Even though the Gulf of Lions is unpleasant, I appreciate the writing. I think it a good dramatic effect when the winds and waves hurl the sailors. I do not like a sunless day. It is good writing to speak about how water rolls over Catholic sailors who perished at sea. I am a bit upset at Pedro who was a drunk. Juan's love for his old spaniel is sweet. I don't like pirates, so the old Greek pirateer, the Argo, is off my list. They had to eat Pedrillo, and at least they divided him up evenly. The vulture of Prometheus is mentioned with good care. Pedrillo saved the others from starvation. It is very strange how they did blasphemy and foam and roll, but it works in the story. That small present made to Juan at Cadiz was nice. That Juan abstained from cannibalism was good. The joys of drinking are silly joys. I like the usual phrase, heavens will be done. Byron jests by saying how good it is to think, which is an act the Greeks and Romans were good at doing. Karen's bark frightens me. A lovely female face at 17 on the shore with one all haggard is a stark contrast. I like how they sigh. I hate time and nature's wrinkling laws. I don't like the phrase, God only knows. I do like nature's good old college. Bright Phoebus is always brilliant. That Haiti was the freshest is weird. I like how she steps timidly. I am not a fan of the British world of fashion. I like how that happiness and joy are twins to win together. A moon rolled on is a good way for saying the next day. I do not like Xerxes' worthy pleasures. The Stygian river frightens me. I do not like it when humans are called earth angels. I like the phrase employed the muse of history's pen. I don't like Sardanapalus' idea to eat, drink and love and forget the rest. It is selfish. I like it that dear philosophy comes to one's aid. Equals Angel Kelly with me. Melodic thoughts on Richard Rorty's equals essays on Heidegger and others equals. I like the idea of viewing philosophers such as Descartes, Kant, Hegel and Nietzsche and others as assigning them in the place of a conversational sequence, rather than viewing them as Rorty says as initiating or manifesting a radical rupture. I do not like the idea that the self-reliance and patriotism found in James and Dewey are alien to Nietzsche. I do not go for the idea that switching over to seeing truth as intellectual progress to the Darwinian picture of transformation is better. Why do we have to make a choice when we can have both? I am uneasy with the suggestion that God or mind is incapable of being described in the same way we describe tables and trees. Sometimes that language is used to describe things makes me uncomfortable because it is our descriptions which get us what we want, and sometimes such a practice of the art of description does not cover the benefits of ellipsis, or leaving things out, in order to get what we want. I am uneasy with the term illusions. I do not like it, though I cannot stop it, that everything can be reshaped. I do not like the suggestion of possibilities as much as having hopes for what those suggestions imply. I like the fact that philosophy is modeled on science. I like the fact that pragmatists such as John Dewey turn away from theoretical science. I appreciate attempts to pigeonhole ready every actual event which might occur. I actually like, contra Rorty, the notion of a God's eye view, but only within literature, like the Bible as literature. I love the quote, "Love is the only law." I love this passage. Philosophy is not simply the utilization of that tradition, not simply the distribution of truth values over a range of sentences which are already present in the language, because all essential philosophical questioning is necessary untimely. Philosophy is essentially untimely because it is one of those few things that can never find an immediate echo in the present. Heidegger, I like it that instead of Heidegger thinking that the social world exists for the poet and the thinker, but the opposite, that the pragmatist thinks of it the other way around. I am against most analytic philosophers when they are squeamish about paradoxes. I love pragmatism that does not seek solutions for most philosophical problems, but seeks instead to dissolve those problems by just ignoring them because they are cultural war starters. I love the fact that science for pragmatists such as Rorty and myself is read as literature too. I do not like it that Lenin and Stalin turned Marxism into a state religion. Oilmen of Texas frighten me. I love that philosophy of utilitarianism of the greatest happiness for the greatest number. I like it when Rorty says that he thinks that pragmatism is a good place to end up. Most of the times I do not like Platonism. I do not like the Nietzschean evaluation of the will to power nor of his concept of the eternal recurrence. I like utilitarian ends. Rorty once suggested in an email that I read Kierkegaard's equals philosophical fragments equals. I am not much of a fan of Pauline Christianity. Nor does everything in Heidegger's equals being and time equals float my boat. I do not like it when it is the case that we have hope that one day truth may become evident to all people. I do not like it that some people think that philosophy has won the quarrel with poetry. I think that it is funny that what matters to philosophers is literal truth. I do not like power freaks. Nor do I like the phrase the essence of truth. Contra Wittgenstein, I am not much a fan of playing sophistical language games. I like the fact that Heidegger thinks of common sense as sophistry. I don't like it that Spinoza identified God with nature. Sometimes Wittgenstein's equals philosophical investigations disturbs me. I do not like the concept of nothingness. Sometimes I am upset with the idea of contemporary culture. With Wittgenstein, I am unhappy that he gives us only two options, mysticism, or the via negativia or sacred silence. I love Aristophanes, but his two halves of people coming together is not real. I like the Derridean act of speaking several languages at once. I love this passage. Important, revolutionary physics, and metaphysics, has always been literary in the sense that it has faced the problem of introducing new jargon and nudging aside the language games currently in place. I am not the biggest fan of Derrida's concepts of difference and trace. I love it that Sigmund Freud thought that we never cease from erotic struggle with images of our parents, writes Rorty. As I said earlier, I do not like the idea of nothingness, so Paul de Man's presence of nothingness is silly. I do not like it that Derrida realizes that one good way to make something look enigmatic is to treat it as a joke. I do like it that Derrida is playful. It is fine that there are molecules behind tables, atoms behind molecules, and quarks behind atoms. I like the attempts to formulate great big new vocabularies. The Americal cultural left is something which disturbs me sometimes, though I am a great liberal. I have never liked the idea of the death of God. I cannot stand humiliation of people. The idea of moral obligation is good. I like the idea that morality is more a matter of self-creation rather than self-knowledge. Novels such as Pale Fire Don Quixote and Dostoevsky's story Underground Man are favorites. I do not like Lyotard's contrast between scientific knowledge and narrative. I am not the greatest fan of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World . I love John Dewey's quote that poetry and religious feeling will be the unforced flowers of life. Like Emerson, I am not much a fan of the French Revolution because it did more damage for all than the good it was supposed to do. I love Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass and his Democratic Vistas . I love this, the people for whom Harold Bloom has invented the sobriquet the School of Resentment would not be caught dead with an expression of hopefulness on their faces. I like Robinson Jeffers and his own dying falls in his poetry. I do not like structures of power. I do not like the quote by Nietzsche which begins, "Truth is a mobile army of metaphors, metonyms and anthropomorphisms. A sum of human relations which have been enhanced, transposed, and embellished poetically and rhetorically, and which after long use seem firm, canonical, and obligatory to a people." I actually like Roberto Unger's slogan that everything is politics. I like the idea of being a good liberal where my attempt is to alleviate unnecessary suffering. Angel Penelope with me. Melodic notes on Lord Byron's Canto 3 of Don Juan . I think it fabulous that Byron wonders what would have happened if Laura would have been Petrarch's wife. I also appreciate it that Byron talks about Milton and Dante as the only two he knew of who sung of heaven and hell, and marriage. I think it amazing that Dante's more abstruse ecstatic / meant to personify the mathematics. When Juan was disposed off of Cape Matapan, he selected the spoil which he gathered, but I don't like the collecting of the spoils of anything. I do not like the thought of Argus biting anybody by the breeches. It is strange to have an honest friendship with a married lady, as the strangeness lies in the necessary trust which must mutually be given to all. Sometimes strong emotions bother me. I like pipes and drums and their music. The Pyrrhic dancing that is martial is interesting. I too like pictures of little Greeks. I am touched by the bloom that returns to Hades' cheeks. I like it that Juan is considered the mildest mannered man. That good wine ne'er washed down better fare is nice reminds me of Falstaff being as good as bread and wine, Orson Welles, as well as Emerson's poem Bacchus, as well as G.K. Chesterson's poem about Noah. I do not like the thought of a glutton all the time eating up mutton. I am happy that Juan in his bosom pleaded for Hades' sake. Sometimes I do not like the spirit of old Greece, and its few heroic rays since we are talking mostly of the Trojan War when we talk about the Greek heroes. Cyclops mad with blindness frightens me. I like strong human hearts. I do not like those words which shook Belshazzar in his hall. I love the fleecy clouds about the moon. I love as pure as Psyche ere she grew a wife. It is a charming phrase. I do not like it when Byron speaks of Sappho as burning, as with love. I like the sea-born salamis. I am appalled by Turkish hordes. I like it that Troy owes so much to Homer. I like it that Dr. Samuel Johnson took on Milton, his life falling into Johnson's way. Angel Jennifer with me. Melodic thoughts on Bruce Cooklick's A History of Philosophy in America 1720 to 2000 . I too do not like it when philosophy is oversimplified. It is funny that Americans have sometimes assumed that whatever the Western Europeans say must be correct, especially if it is almost unintelligible. Cooklick has a chapter called Philosophy and Politics, but I don't like that concept. In its place I like to think of philosophy or politics. I happen to think that John Calvin, though I disagree with him, is an okay thinker. I love both of Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica 1687, and Optics 1704. I also like John Locke's Essay Concerning Human Understanding 1690. I do not like it that Jonathan Edwards believed that primary qualities reduce to solidity. I also do not like it that Edwards struggled with an abyss infinitely deeper than hell. I do not like that in Edward's book, Religious Affections that he asked how was true religion signified, and how could its signs be distinguished from the false? The answer to both questions seems obvious to me. I think it is funny that he thought that God gave grace, or gives grace to people. I do not see how Christians behave much differently than the rest of us, as Edwards did. I like the historical event of the Great Awakening. For some reason, I am a weary reader of Thomas Paine's books on political theory, common sense and the age of reason . I do not like the thought that if God is all-powerful, that humans can do no evil nor suffer. Nathaniel Emmons believed that the answer to the question what made up sin, that it was sinning, something which is a concept I am against. I have no interest in the book True Religion Delineated by Joseph Bellamy. The idea of the posthumous lectures The Moral Government of God by Nathaniel William Taylor frightens me since I vote for the separation of church and state always. I love the idea that God was omniscient and created the best possible system, but agency limited his power, writes Cooklick on Taylor's beliefs. I do not like the concept behind the 3-volume book Philosophy of the Human Mind by Dugald Stewart. I read it all of the time, but ultimately I am not a great fan of Immanuel Kant's book Critique of Pure Reason . I am also not much interested in G.W.F. Hegel's system, but as a whole I love to read his books. Something about the Scott, James McCosh's Intuitions of the Mind which accepted Newton's view that God constituted space and time bothers me. I love it when Cooklick, writing of Ralph Waldo Emerson's Nature says, friendly to man, nature somehow wore the colors of the spirit. I think it's sad that Emerson's Nature has had a limited readership. I don't like the idea of God in Christ by Horace Bushnell. But, I do like Bushnell's Nature and the Supernatural as together constituting the one system of God 1858, which is his effort to clarify his supernaturalism. John Williamson Nevin saddens me when he wrote that Christianity was a perpetual fact. I love pragmatism, a form of idealism. It disturbs me that a fine instance of masterly polemic which is John Stuart Mill's examination of Sir William Hamilton's philosophy is not read nowadays. I love Charles Darwin's The Origin of the Species but I do not much care for his Descent of Man . I do not like D.F. Strauss's examination of the New Testament stories suggesting Jesus' divinity in light of Strauss's own best knowledge of the way the world was. I love John Dewey, he's my spiritual angel Pop, Robbie Pop. I do not like Josiah Royce's The Religious Aspect of Philosophy . I do not like Edward Caird's Critical Philosophy of Immanuel Kant . I love it when Dewey thought that one's opinion should depend on one's philosophy. I like Oliver Wendell Holmes' book The Common Law but do not like The Path of the Law because the path is the law, not of the law. I like it that the Kantian word pragmatist becomes the English pragmatic. I don't like the Society of Peirce studies for Charles Sanders Peirce. I do not like William James's reflex theory of mind though I love him very much. Thus, I do not like his Principles of Psychology . I somehow do not like it that James's idea that religious experience has value as it gives value to human experience. It is complicated of me. I do not like it when George Santayana is acerbic, but otherwise he is a fine philosopher. James's The Philosophy of Loyalty is nice. I love it that Walter Lippmann and Herbert Croly would argue credibly for collective action of one kind of another. I like James's A Pluralistic Universe . I love it that Cooklick writes of Dewey having a cautiously benign view of humanity. That meaningfulness of experience is susceptible to human understanding is hard for me to grasp of Dewey's own idea because I like it when Robert Brandom exorcises the word experience in place of discourse in his own philosophy. I love Dewey's book The Public and its Problems . I love both Thomas S. Kuhn's book The Structure of Scientific Revolutions as well as the philosopher Richard Rorty, because Rorty is my angel brother, and John Dewey's, aka Angel Robbie Pop's, spiritual son too. I do not like the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy. I do not like Arthur O. Lovejoy's book The Great Chain of Being . I do not like it when Wilfrid Sellers urged that there was a separation between knowledge and intuition, though I like his other work very much. I love Dewey's experimentalism. I am not much a fan of Ludwig Wittgenstein's book Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus . I am upset that Karl Hempel thought that Rorty betrayed him as a student. Sometimes I am not a fan of Martin Heidegger's philosophy, but I never liked the man. I appreciate The Portable Nietzsche by translator Walter Kaufmann. I like C. I. Lewis's Mind and the World Order . I do like Willard Orman Van Quine's idea of ontological relativity. I do not like Herbert Marcuse's equals one-dimensional man equals, nor do I like Clifford Geertz's equals interpretation of cultures equals. I am not much a fan of Saul Kripke. I love Rorty's book equals philosophy and the mirror of nature equals, as well as another book equals contingency, irony and solidarity equals. I like Noam Chomsky. Equals Angel Diana with me. Melodic thoughts on the creation story. 3 And God said, "Let there be light, and there was light." 4 And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. Equals from Genesis of the King James Bible. I would have loved this even better had God begun with saying let there be music, and there was music. There is something which wars upon our regular understanding of the origin of light when we read this passage. I do not like the light, but the darkness is my favorite. The light is young, but it is not a fresh light. It is not such a big deal as God exaggerates the light from the get-go. This light is a loud light, not a quiet one from what I can gather. It is a common light, and by virtue of its commonness, I dislike it, being that we are talking about the source of light, not reflected light, which is more pleasant, which comes off of objects all around. For who enjoys staring into the sun? It is annoying to our sense of vision. Though this is considered a favorite opening by some, E's opening I believe is rather weak. Because it is not a fresh light, it seems to me to be a late light, that something was before it much earlier which I would have liked to have told. It is a noble light, which makes it less mysterious, though the passage itself is mysterious, which is one of its good qualities. The light is indeed a passionate one, but there is no passion to this passage of Genesis, just a straightforward matter-of-factness of the situation that God causes. The light is not all, for there is darkness too, which I like more. This present moment of the now in Genesis does not seem as privileged as other moments of the now to me, like the part with Jacob and the wrestling angel, which brings us closer to the action in the moment, in its intensity, than the creation of the light and all thereafter. The light is not necessarily dismal, but still I do not wish that God created it, rather sticking with darkness, and a music in the darkness, would have been better. The creation of light is wondrous because it comes about by God saying it into being. The light cannot be beat, which here is one of its strengths, for it defeats me when I try and criticize its qualities. I do not like how the light comes, that it comes from God himself, though I think that it is all right that he speaks it into being. I do not like the opening of Genesis, nor do I like the opening of light in general because it feels too silly to me. The hero of the Bible, God, does not need to be the maker of the universe as well, since his personality is strong enough to stand on its own without that too. I do not like the idea of a floating God making floating brightness. 4. It reminds me too much of the sun, which does not stand well in comparison with God. The light does not seem to have a soul. The darkness is rather cooler in my judgment. There is something tyrannous to the forthrightness by which God says let there be light. And, like I said, I do not mind that he says things, but I do mind how he says them. That God comes upon the scene in the beginning at the beginning is strange in the Torah because the creation of all is never mentioned again in the Torah. Light seems to me to be closer to death than darkness because God who made it is closer to being a symbol for death, Freud's reality principle, than life. The light is not fast, it has no speed in the Bible, it just is and happens. The darkness is disturbed straightaway. I do like it that God's breath, which also gave Adam life when he exhaled into Adam's nostrils, also created light and other elements of the creation. I wish that God had created woman before man, and even before the light. That God has no mate until the Shekinah, the community as his wife, is strange to me at the beginning. I think that this passage can only be read by glancing at it sideways, and not straight on because it is too strong and shrewd of the writer to be taken all at once to be understood. That light is both a particle and a wave does not matter to God. That the sun and the stars were created after the original light seems odd to me. This light is good in one way because it bakes into the reader's imagination at least some explanation of how things were started at the origin of it all, regardless that it is all done very badly as a mystery. Equals Angel Honey with me. Melodic notes on equals the secret book according to John equals. As in the Bible, there exists an immeasurable light, which is good in this story, but also good is that it is not seen as a creature, so therefore the light is not superior to anyone or anything. I love the element of eternal life in this book. Though light may not be a creature, truth itself is an invisible spirit. And, therefore truth is not light. I do not like the idea of repentance nor of the elevation of wisdom away from humans. In this book, I dislike the projection of an image of a human being because there is some confusion as to from where the maker thought a voice came that exhaled the human, and that voice was its mother. I appreciate the creation of the animate Adam, one in the image of his maker. I do not like demons because there are no such things, thank goodness. What we might suspect are demons at times are just strong hallucinations due to the misfiring of neurons in the brain. I like the idea of imperfection in the human. As Wallace Stevens said, the imperfect is our paradise. I do not like the idea that life, called Zoe, is our sibling, she is also called wisdom, or Sophia. I never like the idea of a luminous cloud, for clouds are prettier when flat and dull than iridescent. I do not like the idea of a counterfeit spirit for the same reason I do not believe in demons. Angel Diana with me. Of the This is the Key of the Kingdom poem, I love the key, but kingdoms imply monarchical rule which I dislike. I like that it is a friendly line to leave a basket of flowers on a bed, and that is the key. It is all right that nobody else is in the room with the flowers. To say this is the key is good because it shows that the key was found. The yard is disappointing because of all the weeds. The bed in the chamber is a beautiful bed with all of those flowers in a basket on it. What else could be the key of the kingdom but those flowers in a basket? They are so good. Unfortunately, the house seems harder to find because of the winding lane. The empty bed is very good as it would ruin the surprise and charm of the poem if someone else was on the bed with the flowers. As for the kingdom, I don't like it. I love people, but larger than local territories, realms and areas frighten me. The broad street is a good way that is normal but poetic to describe as a street that is broad. The logic of the poem makes me uneasy, the scene gets smaller and smaller logically, therefore it is the reductiveness which I do not like, in either direction, because it is like a search or hunt for finality and for final information. Angel Diana with me. Thoughts of Wilfrid Sellars Empirism and the philosophy of mind equals. I do not like it when philosophers attack other philosophers. I am unhappy with the Hegelian term immediacy too. I do not like it when something is not further analyzable. I do not much care for sense content. I like the distinction Sellars makes between facts and particulars. I like it when no position is hopeless. I am not a fan of seeking knowledge, but rather, like Richard Rorty suggested, seeking hope as a substitute for seeking knowledge. I do not like the content of the phrase X is non-inferentially known to be read. I do not like the idea of spatio-temporal juxtaposition, or overlapping, of those relations which are the array of sense contents. I actually like logician's jargon. I have never understood the popularity of empirical knowledge. I do not like it that some say that the reason that they have for empirical knowledge of facts is due to some foundation in the facts which constitute members of a class which contains non-vertical members. I do not like it that perplexities arise when one tries to think things through. I do not like symbolized sentences. I am against theorizing, and I am against that sense-datum talk which some think is a language. I like the good word contrived. I do not like the idea, as stated by one of Sellars' chapters, called the logic of looks. I actually like both Sellars and the myth of the given, but in a different way than the way he argues against it. I do not like it when C.D. Broad talks about seeing elliptical pennies if nothing elliptical is before his mind. I don't like it that we have ever to find the answer. Like Robert Brandom, I try not to use the word experience in my own vocabulary, but rather I choose to use the word discourse as an alternative. I love the idea of endorsing claims. I do like the idea of reporting our experience, that is what makes it social discourse. I like the weird distinction between the natural and the epistemic when it comes to how things, like colors, merely look. I like the example of Cleopatra's Needle being tall because I have a coffee mug I always use with a picture of that rock formation on it. I like the idea of standard conditions as in the statement, X is red. Equals. X looks red to standard observers in standard conditions. I do not like the piecemeal habits of response to various objects in various circumstances. I love this passage, thus, the very nature of looks talk is such as to raise questions to which it gives no answer. What is the intrinsic character of the common descriptive content of these three experiences? Concerning naming, I have trouble too with this question. Does ordinary usage have a name for this kind of experience? I do not like much of René Descartes' philosophy, though I read him all of the time. I do not like ideas of red as though they were red particulars. I love the thought that the real test of language lies not in its account of what has been called, by H. Price, thinking in absence, but in its account of thinking in presence. I like Sellars' question, does empirical knowledge have a foundation? Also a chapter title of section 8. In this book. I do not like the idea that knowledge by virtue of being knowledge has authority. I appreciate it that observation reports resemble analytic statements and that being correctly made is a sufficient as well as necessary condition for their truth. I do not like the ideas of symptoms and signs of the presence of a green object in standard conditions. I do not entirely agree with the statement that the given, in epistemological tradition, is what is taken by these self-authenticating episodes. These talkings are, so to speak, the unmoved movers of empirical knowledge, the knowings in presence. I do not like the statement that physical objects are not really colored. I do appreciate the idea of inner episodes which combine privacy and intersubjectivity. I do not like it that talk about objects reduces to semantical talk about the verbal components. I love the distinction between the language of theory and the language of observation. Sellers chapter title, The Logic of Private Episodes, Thoughts is nice. I also think well done is the chapter title The Logic of Private Episodes, Impressions. Equals Angel Ariel with me. Melodic thoughts on Hans-Georg Gadamer's equals truth and method equals. I like it that in his book Equals Logic Equals, John Stuart Mill applied inductive logic to the moral sciences. I like Wilhelm Dilthey, but I am not a fan of contemporary neo-Kantianism. I differ a bit from defining Bildung as culture as Gadamer does. I like the idea instead that Bildung has natural form. I love this passage, man carries in his soul the image of God, after whom he is fashioned, and which man must cultivate for himself. I like this passage, Hegel shows that basically such a man is lacking in the power of abstraction, the man who abandons himself to his particularity. He cannot turn his gaze from himself towards something universal. I do not like Gadamer's line that work is restrained desire. Death is desire, writes Shakespeare in his sonnets. I am not a big fan of Plato's critique of sophism. And, I used to want to read equals Logique de Port Royal equals very badly, but now it does not interest me that much. I love this passage. Vico criticizes the Stoics because they believe in reason as the regula veri and, contrawise, praises the old academians, who assert only the knowledge of not knowing anything, and the new ones, because they excel in the art of arguing, which is a part of rhetoric. I like practical knowledge, phronesis, best. I am sometimes against wit and humor as having top social significance as Shaftesbury did. I like Henri Bergson. I do not like the concept of judgment as being good sense. Nor do I like Kant's notion of reflexive judgment. I do not like Kant's idea that for taste must be one's very own. Kant unfortunately denies that taste has any significance as knowledge. I do like the doctrine of ideal beauty. As well, I appreciate this passage, wherever there is inventio, where something is due to inspiration and not to methodical calculation, the important thing is ingenium, genius. I do not like the question, is there anything ugly in nature? I don't like to use the word experience, Erlebnis, especially if it is Dilthey's experience as what is directly given. I appreciate Nietzsche's all experiences last a long time in profound people. I do not like every experience is, in Schleiermacher's words, an element of infinite life. I love infinitely Robert Ernst Curtius' monumental work on medieval literary aesthetics, equals European literature in the Latin Middle Ages equals. I do not devalue the changing relationship between symbol and allegory. I love the concept of expression. I like Goethe's description of empiricism as the million-headed hydra. I am against complete indifference. I am not a fan of retrieving the question of artistic truth. I like Richard Hammond's quote that perception is significant in itself. I love Gadamer's concept of play as the clue to ontological explanation. I love it when he describes the theater as having no random succession. I like his statement that a festival exists only in being celebrated. I appreciate Plato's equals Phaedrus equals. Thus, I love the play of art. And, I love the ontological valence of the picture. I do not like the idea that presentation leads to an increase in being, the ontological. I do not like it that Gadamer believes that the divine becomes picturable only through the word and image. I do not like the modern aesthetic religion of culture. Nor do I like this line, a symbol not only points to something, it represents it by taking its place. I do not like it that we must reconstruct the work. I do not understand why we have to choose either to follow Hegel or Schleiermacher. I am not a great fan of using uniqueness as a way to distinguish between oneself and others because I think we are basically the same where it matters. I am not a fan of Schleiermacher's universal hermeneutics. I love the idea that genius itself creates models and rules. I do not like Dilthey's plan to transpose hermeneutics to the study of history. I do not like the slogan that powers grow with work. I am not a big fan of natural philosophy. I do like the transition from a psychological to a hermeneutical grounding of the human sciences. I like it that Dilthey insists that all psychological life is subject to the force of circumstances. I do not like the phrase reality of life. I like this passage, historical consciousness is a mode of self-knowledge. I actually like intellectualism. I do not like looking at things from a standpoint of life. But, I do like the inquiring eye. I never have liked the concept of authority in and as knowledge and in and as other things. I do like the way situations have an immediacy about them. I do not like the question, which is the right interpretation of the Old Testament, the Jewish one or the Christian one. I appreciate Greek tragedy. I love it that in human relations the important thing is to experience the thou truly as a thou. I do not always appreciate the comic motif in the Platonic dialogues. I like the art of dialectic is not the art of being able to win every argument. I do not like the Socratic concept of the midwife bringing knowledge into being. I am not much a fan of questioning. I love philology and the love of speech. I do not like it that Greeks insisted that the word is only a name. I do not always value the idea of correctness. I like Plato's turn to discourse. I am not much interested in Christian theology. Therefore, I do not like the concept of the logos. And, metaphor may be good in poetry, but overall it does not really do anything, unfortunately, like Donald Davidson suggested. I like the idea that we make up our world by our use of language, therefore, I like it that language is seen as a medium. I like the phrase God is one because it is like God with me, or God with you. I do not like it that the dialect of question and answer always precedes the dialect of interpretation. I somewhat like the passage that the artistic mind of man, which mechanically constructs useful things, will ultimately understand all beauty in terms of the work of his own mind. I am not much a fan on St. Augustine's interpretation of the creation in the Bible. I like the idea of language being self-presentation. I do not like the idea that the coming into language that occurs in a poem is like entering into relationships of order that support and guarantee the truth of what is said. Angel honey with me. My melodic thoughts on the book of the prophet Jeremiah. The Lord is a good God. Jeremiah says that when God came to him, that he could not speak, for he was a child. But Jeremiah being a child then was an illusion. I think it an illusion, from Jeremiah's standpoint, that the kings, princes, peoples and prophets of Judah were against Jeremiah. It is an illusion that the people had vanity. It is an illusion that two evils existed against the Lord, that the people had forsaken him the living waters, and that they hewed out broken cisterns which could hold no water. It is an illusion that a whole people transgressed against the Lord. It is angelic of Jeremiah that he was innocent. It was an illusion that the rain showers had been withholden. It is an illusion that there were backsliding children. It was not necessary to gird the loins with sackcloth because the Lord was not fiercely angry. Jeremiah beholding the mountains tremble was a mirage. That the Lord had fierce anger was an illusion. There was thus no cause for Jeremiah to say woe is me now. It was an illusion that God make in Jeremiah's mouth words of fire. It is an illusion that there was no peace. It was only an illusion that there was a den of robbers in the house. It is a hallucination that the people did not know the judgment of the Lord. There was not as much milk and honey from the land as once thought. It is angelic that the Ethiopian cannot change his or her skin, but to think that evil people cannot do good in time is a hallucination. It was an illusion that God stopped the mirth of people, and the mirth of the bridegroom and the mirth of the bride. It is angelic of the Lord that he can do with us as if he was a potter. It is an illusion that there is everlasting confusion. It is angelic of the Lord to triumph the righteousness. It is an illusion that there are cursed days and cursed men. It is a hallucination that the Lord's voice is like fire, and that it also breaketh the rock in pieces. It is a hallucination that the Lord would bring an everlasting reproach upon anyone. It is an illusion that the Lord would take away the mirth and the voice of the bride and the sound of the millstones and the light of the candle. It is a hallucination that nations are evil, or that evil shall go forth from nation to nation. It is angelic of the Lord to say that ye shall not serve the king of Babylon. It is a hallucination that evil comes so that the sword, famine, pestilence happen like vile figs which cannot be eaten. It is an illusion that the Lord sends in his voice fear and trembling, but not peace. It is an illusion that there are no healing medicines. It is a hallucination that all of one's loves have forgotten thee. It is a hallucination that there is any fierce anger of the Lord. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, is a hallucination. It is an illusion that people did not hearken to the Lord in proclaiming victory. The evil way is only a hallucination. It is an illusion that the Chaldeans burnt the city down with fire. The concept of evil is a bad hallucination. It is angelic to say, the Lord God liveth. It is an illusion that the king of Babylon was Jeremiah's enemy. It is an illusion to say that Nebo and Misgab nations deserve woe, confusion and dismay. It is an illusion that the sea has sorrow because it cannot be quiet. It is an illusion in the story of the sound of battle. It is a hallucination that the Lord would lay any snares for anyone. It is an illusion that there are liars in the story. It was angelic of the Lord to provide sustenance every day. Equals Angel Donna with me. Melodic ponderings. If it was the case that I enjoyed being perplexed, then I would like and lean towards René Descartes' philosophy. And, if I liked reductionism in philosophy and elsewhere, I would think that the concept of judgment as being merely good sense is a good concept. But, if I did not like expressionism, I would like natural philosophy. And, then if I liked the phrase the reality of life, then Greek tragedy would be distasteful to me. But, if I did not appreciate la nuage as a medium, then I would not like the phrase, God is one. And, if the Lord God was a bad God, then evil would not be a bad hallucination. Equals Angel Jennifer with me. A melodic treaty of peace. I am for reflexes of the muscles, it is a good system. I like evolution of the history of life on Earth, though I do not appreciate the study of genetics. I like it when it rains, but I do not care for high altitudes. If I did not think that greenhouses were great, then I would think that energy to be a make-believe and harmful concept. I happen to understand entropy as a hallucination, and I actually praise uncertainty because its mystery is divine. I think cosmology is far behind, as it is as far behind as worshipping reason as the main source of authority that we humans can muster. I do not like the system of supply and demand, for I believe that competition is an illusion. And, I understand that a great infatuation with money and with the economy is the wrong way to go, and yet I think that change is divine. The idea of variables makes me think of variables as hallucinations, and probability itself and the study thereof as the greatest hallucinations if anything is so. I do like randomness, and yet principles turn out to be hallucinations in the end. War itself is a very harmful means of going the wrong way, while towns and cities go in a divine direction when they demonstrate their heavenly capacities for peace. Equals Angel Honey with me. Melodic thoughts on Richard Rorty's book, equals philosophy is cultural politics equals. I think God is the angelic being above all other angelic beings. Unlike my hero Richard Rorty's suggestion, I think that dropping talking about God is not a very angelic thing to do. Perhaps in some cases we should block the road to inquiry as with inquiry about nuclear fission. It is going in a good way when Rorty says that ontology precedes cultural politics. Socialness is the most angelic act that I can think of, so I find very angelic Rorty's discussion on Robert Brandam's priority of the social section. I think both the Big Bang and the Last Judgment are major hallucinations. I think it was with ultimate goodness that Galileo did not bow down to Aristotle or to the Roman Catholic Church but trusted in his own evidence of his senses. I think that it is a hallucination if anybody says that they see the risen Christ in the disk of the sun. It is angelic of Rorty to write, empiricism's appeal to experience is as inefficacious as appeals to the Word of God unless backed up with a predisposition on the part of the community to take such appeals seriously. I think that belief in zombies that behave just like normal people is a hallucination. I think Daniel Dennett's psychology of mind to be angelic. I think cultural politics is hallucinatory by its very nature. I think it an illusion that objects were made for man. Harping on accurate representations of objects is to promote hallucination in the end. The skeptical doubts of René Descartes were hallucinations. To believe the world is lost is a hallucination. The ongoing conversation of humankind is angelic. Questions such as are there really gods and goddesses? And are numbers really real? Are equally silly hallucinations. Similarly, the question, do the numerals really refer to entities? Is going the wrong way. Paul Tillich's idea that social democratic utopias have begun to play the role of God is an angelic idea. It is angelic of Rorty to write, the coherence of talk about X does not guarantee the discussability of the existence of X. Hegel's book, equals the phenomenology of spirit equals is a divine-like book. I say that it is hallucinatory to write, individuals are free to make up their own semi-private language games, as Henry James Sr., and as William Blake did, for example, as long as they do not insist that everybody else plays them as well. It is hallucinatory for Nietzsche to write, we do not have any organ at all for knowing, for truth, we know. Just as much as may be useful in the interest of the human herd. It is angelic of M. H. Abrams to hold that poetry is, not only on par with, but the necessary condition of, any true and comprehensive philosophy. Yet, it is a hallucination for Rorty to say that poetry cannot be a substitute for a monotheistic religion, but it can serve the purposes of a secular polytheism. To promote the idea that we deserve to be greatly happy is angelic of Rorty. The pragmatic and utilitarian claim that the will to truth is inseparable from the will to happiness is an angelic thing to write. John Stuart Mill's equals on liberty equals is angelic to the ultimate power. Also, William James equals varieties of religious experience equals goes along the right way. It is a hallucination for Plato to believe Eros could be identified with something unique, atemporal and non-human. It is angelic of Rorty to title his chapter Justice as a larger loyalty. It is angelic of Daniel Dennett to state that a self is a center of narrative gravity. The phrase people like ourselves goes the wrong way. It is a silly thing for Ian Hacking to joke, me rational, you Jane. That John Dewey viewed moral principles not as self-evident truths but as rough summaries of past practices is angelic. The phrase I cannot really be beaten because on my side there is a power is a hallucinatory statement. Jürgen Habermas' communicative rationality is an angelic concept. That Dewey had no use for the concepts of theodicy or of absolute knowledge is angelic. Nietzsche's remark that only the rational can be beautiful is a hallucination. Questions such as do you believe in truth? And does truth exist? Are hallucinatory ways of thinking. It is hallucinatory of Rorty to write that for religion in its uncontaminated form, argument is no more important than belief. It is an act of hallucination for philosophy to attempt to replace God with truth. It is angelic of some sciences to discover things, so it is a hallucination to remark that's nice, but is it really so important? It is angelic of Donald Davidson to write that most of our beliefs about such things as trees have to be true. It is angelic of William Blake to write that all deities reside within the human breast. The hope that finally you get something right is a hallucination. Replacing the term conversational philosophy from continental philosophy is an angelic act. It is angelic of Rorty to write, the term getting it right, I would argue, is appropriate only when everybody interested in the topics pretty much draws the same inferences from the same assertions. Arthur Fine's assertion that the entire realism-anti-realism issue should be set aside is an angelic thing to say. Fine's natural ontological attitude is heavenly. It is angelic of Rorty to write that it is acceptable to wait for a guru, but we need no priests. It is a hallucination for Steven Pinker to write, the mind is a system of organs of computation, designed by natural selection to solve the kinds of problems our ancestors faced in their foraging ways of life. Angel grouchy with me.